As Richard just shared, UN Syrian envoy Lakhdar Brahimi recognizes just how fragile even a discussion about peace in Syria can be. So it's no small feat. He will be bringing the two opposing sides to the table on Saturday. James Gelvin, professor of modern Middle East history at the University of California, Los Angeles, joins us live now with some perspective. James, why don't I begin? Earlier, I spoke with former U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Thomas Pickering, about the Syria talks, and this is what he had to say about Brahimi's mediating.
Brahimi met with them separately today, but he's getting them in the room together tomorrow. I thought it might take him weeks to do that.
Weeks. Now, the ambassador said Brahimi brings unique expertise to tackle tough conflicts like these. Professor, how do you think Brahimi achieved the face-to-face talks, and does he have what it takes to actually have a breakthrough?
Well, those are two very, very different questions. Number one, Brahimi is a very skilled diplomat. There's no doubt about that. Does he have what it takes to achieve a breakthrough? Absolutely not. It's not going to occur. It would take a magician, not an ambassador, to do that.
So what can be expected?
Well, what can be expected is that expectations are going to continue to diminish, and that the principals are going to say, okay, look, we're not going to reach some sort of agreement on a transition, so let's talk about humanitarian aid, let's talk about corridors, let's talk about a ceasefire, a localized ceasefire, that sort of thing. If that sort of package gets through both sides, then what's going to happen is they're going to declare a victory. But this is not going to end up with both sides sitting down together, figuring out a transition and changing the government of Syria.
The long road to peace has to start somewhere. Obviously, this could be a starting point. How do you keep these forces moving in the right direction?
Well, they talk about we'll start with baby steps in order to perhaps build confidence. The idea being that, like in the early days of the Israel-Egyptian agreements, what you have to do is you have to get sides to come together and so on and so forth. The sides already have confidence. They're confident that the other side, if it is victorious, is going to kill them. And so, therefore, they are not going to sit down. They are not going to agree to anything of substantive value. And the way this is going to end up is not through negotiations.
So crystal ball this thing for me, down the road a piece. What do you see happening?
Well, Brahimi, about 6 months ago, used the word Somalization, the idea being that Syria very likely will end up like Somalia. In other words, it will be a recognized state, but nobody is truly sovereign over the entirety of the territory. You'll have the government that's going to keep a corridor in the west for the most part. You'll have in the north and in the south, you'll have opposition, a variety of opposition movements. And in the Far East, very likely what you'll have is Kurdish autonomy. But overall, what you're not going to have is a state the way we would recognize a sovereign state.
What about, we saw the civil war in Lebanon. It went on and on and on, dragged on. Do you see similarities with this one? And you know, as you well know, in Lebanon, they kind of came up with a formula to try and keep a workable government in place. Is there any chance that might happen with Syria?
No, Syria is an altogether different phenomenon than what happened in Lebanon. What happened in Lebanon was that the various old elites representing a variety of sects and a variety of political tendencies, at a certain point decided that it would be better for them to work it out than to continue fighting for incremental gains. In the case of Syria, however, that's not going to take place simply because there are no incremental gains. It's a zero-sum game that they're playing. The opposition wins, the government loses. The government wins, the opposition loses. There is no formula for any form of compromise.
So give me your perspective on how long the fighting continues then.
Well, the out-and-out fighting will continue until a stalemate is reached or until one side is victorious over the other. At this point, the government appears to have the wind at its back, but on the other hand, it doesn't appear to be able to take over large parts of the rural areas that the opposition has taken. So very likely the way this is going to end up is Somalia. Very likely the way this is going to end up with the government in charge of most of the large cities in the West. Large swaths of the countryside is going to be controlled by a variety of groups in the opposition. And then in the Far East, the Kurds are going to be able to maintain some form of autonomy similar to what they've won in Iraq.
Professor James Gelvin, thank you so much for joining us from Los Angeles. Appreciate your perspective.